They're the 15 Psalms that are associated with the annual pilgrimages that happened in Israel. So all the faithful Jews, oh man, I think I broke that. I'll just leave it. All the faithful Jews 3 times a year would take their families and anyone who they had with them and embark on this journey to Jerusalem. And today I chose Psalm 127, mostly because I remembered it being my dad's favorite psalm. My dad's a pastor as well, a Baptist pastor, and I had this fuzzy memory of the sermon that he preached about it. And I'll say more about that later. But let's just start by reading this psalm together from our bulletins. I thought we could do it antiphonally, so sort of split us in half down the middle here, and have the folks over on this side, to my left, your right, do the bold words, and then the folks over here do the normal, unbolded words. So, would you stand with me as we do this reading of Scripture? This is Psalm 127, a song of ascents of Solomon. So we'll start over here.
Unless the Lord builds the house,
those who build it labor in vain.
unless the Lord guards the city,
the guard keeps watch in vain.
it is vain that you rise up early,
and go late to rest.
eat the bread of anxious toil.
For God gives sleep to his beloved.
Sons are indeed a heritage from the Lord,
The fruit of the womb a reward.
like arrows in the hand of a warrior.
Are the sons of one's youth.
Happy is the man,
Who has his quiver full of them.
he shall not be put to shame.
When he speaks with his enemies in the gate.
The word of the Lord.
Thanks
be to
be to
God. Thank you. So this is kind of a strange psalm in the sense that it's not really a prayer, and there aren't really any expressions of praise that you'd expect in a psalm. It's more like a proverb, like a wise saying, which makes sense because we just read that the author is Solomon, who was the writer of the Proverbs, the wisest and the most powerful king of Israel. Now, Solomon covers a ton of ground here in 5 short verses: work, shelter, security, food, sleep, family, peripheral concerns, nothing big. Yet so much of what he says about this stuff seems really far away from where we are now, 3,000 years later, half a world away. Solomon was a builder. He built the temple, and he built the palace, and a bunch of other stuff. But for us here in 2018, living in one of the most expensive cities in the world, I think it's a safe bet that very few of us are currently building houses or even have a hope of owning property that we can build on in Vancouver. At this point, it's looking like Denise and I will probably be renting for life until this church can get us a manse to live in, We no longer have walls around our cities or watchmen, guards staying up all night to look for enemy attacks. Apparently, we've graduated to a space force now for that, at least in the States. And with the cost of living in Vancouver, having a quiver full of kids is kind of out of the question. In case you're wondering, ancient Near East quivers fit 20 to 30 arrows. And Solomon's 700 wives might have helped fill his quiver, but in Vancouver, people gasp if you announce you're having a 3rd child, let alone a 30th child, right? And then there's this exclusive focus on sons, which would have been more hoped for than daughters in that time, since sons could defend you in battle and stand up for your honor at the gates where people went to settle their civil disputes. These patriarchal, militaristic images also make this psalm feel kind of archaic and passé. But the stuff about getting up early and staying up late, anxiety, insomnia, 3,000 years later we've got that covered, right? Possibly even more relevant because we have light bulbs now and they can extend our days even further. So at least that part I'll preach. This psalm also has a weird flow. I don't know if you noticed this, but it has this part about work and rest in verses 1 and 2, and then it jumps to this part about children in the rest of the psalm without a lot of warning or connection. And some scholars actually think that these were 2 unrelated proverbs that Solomon just kind of smashed together to make a psalm. But others see more connections between the 2. So for example, building a house is at the beginning. I think it's very strongly linked to the idea of having a family that can live in that house, a household to fill the house with. And in Hebrew, the words for house and the word for son are from the same root word, so they kind of sound similar. And then there's this idea of guards in the first verse. Guards on the city walls the city gate in the last verse. I think, though, that the strongest connection is that work, rest, and children are all intended to be gifts from God and invitations to partner with God. And this is the lens that I want to kind of look through today to interpret this psalm. This lens of partnership with God, which actually Mark preached about, I think, back in May. But I want to specify it even further as a junior partnership. So full disclosure, I straight up stole this idea from my dad's sermon, but I figured that it's not stealing if it's in the family, right? So junior partnership. We're not the boss, but we're not minions. We're junior partners. And God, our senior partner, will start projects, will build and have a vision, and we get invited to come alongside and help out. So it means we can't take full credit for the results, but it also means that the pressure is off, because the buck doesn't stop with us. We don't have to go it alone. So I'm going to look at these three main areas from the psalm through this lens of junior partnership: work, rest, and children. In the beginning, God worked. The first one to work was God, and God is the senior partner in our work. In the beginning, God created. That was a lot of work. God built this universe for us with crabs with 3 teeth in their stomach, setting in motion all these beautiful processes of physics and chemistry and biology. And now we are instructed to bear God's image in our work, to be co-creators and builders and guards and tenders. We are the junior partners who take this material, this raw stuff that our senior partner created, and make something of it. But it's so easy for us to forget that view of work, to get lost in just the grind and the drudgery of the stuff that we do. It's easy for work to become all-consuming and driven by anxiety, just like a busy way of keeping us going so we can avoid stopping and being encountered by painful thoughts or feelings. Or it can become just all about getting our paycheck, or just about proving that we're worth something in a society that really idolizes work and productivity. Everybody wants to rule the world. Everybody wants to make it to the next level. Solomon describes this kind of work as being in vain, as being not worth anything, not contributing any good. Even nonprofit work, even pastoring, can be in vain. It's the kind of work that you absolutely throw yourself into and then come to the end and say, what was the point of all that? It's the kind of work that will fade away after you're gone. And for most of us, that's kind of a scary thought, because we spend the majority of our hours on earth working. So I think we really do want our work to make a difference, to do something. That song that we just sang draws from Psalm 90, where Moses writes, "Establish the work of our hands, God, establish the work of our hands." We want our work to be established and to endure, and to have lasting meaning. So just take a second and think about the work that you do. And if you're unemployed or on leave or retired, just think about the way you spend most of your time or what you contribute to. What would it look like to see your work as a gift from God and to see God as the senior partner in it? To consider that work to be in vain if God is not the senior partner? How does that shift our attitudes about work? Does it bruise our egos? Or does it relieve tension? Maybe it's a confusing idea. I found it a bit confusing to know whether or not I was depending on God in my work. Because it's not the easiest thing, and we don't get an instruction manual or a how-to guide here. We don't get to know how God can build our house for us. But I do think it's closely related to how we treat this idea of rest, which Solomon brings up in verse 2. In the beginning, God rested. The first one to rest was God. And the senior partner in our rest is God. Solomon writes that God gives sleep to God's beloved. Though some people translate it that God gives gifts to God's beloved while they sleep. Either way, there's gift there. And that word beloved is interesting. In Hebrew, it's Jedediah. Do you know anyone named Jedediah? I really like this name now. It's actually the second name that was given to Solomon at birth. So it's a name of Solomon's. And you might remember he uses the word beloved throughout the Song of Solomon as well. So he might just be referring to himself here. But I think that if Scripture teaches us anything, it's that we're all God's beloved. I mean, that's the core of the message of Scripture. We're all Jedediahs. And God gives all of us sleep. That's a free gift from the senior partner. I follow this writer and speaker named Glennon Doyle on Instagram, and recently someone did that thing on Instagram where you can ask them questions, and someone said, Glennon, how is it that you never give up? And she replied, oh no, honey, I give up daily. Every day I say, I've had it, that's enough, I'm dropping it, and I go to sleep. Sleep is a gift and it's a reset button. It's a reminder that we're junior partners and we need to regularly give up and cease our work. Our senior partner biologically wired us to require this. God is no slave driver who expects constant productivity and accomplishment. No, God is our partner who calls us beloved and wants us to receive this gift of rest. Now, I strongly recommend an additional reset button, not just a nightly sleep, but a weekly day of rest, which Christians call a Sabbath day. I am a recovering, guilt-driven workaholic. So my Monday Sabbaths have become more than a reset. They've become like a survival mechanism. I absolutely require that weekly reminder that the world will not stop spinning if I turn off my phone and my computer and stop working for 24 hours. Instead of working non-stop and striving for savings and security that comes from that, Sabbath challenges me to depend on God to provide. Because my senior partner has still got this, even when I'm not online. Sabbath puts my ego in its place. And it's also just super refreshing to partner with God in my rest, to tap into God's playfulness, to God's joy. Sabbath reminds me that work should never supersede or cause me to sacrifice joy and those core relationships of mine. Which brings us to our last area of partnership, children and families. In the beginning, God God made families. He was the first one. God was the first one to seek out family relationships, and God is the senior partner in our families. Solomon calls children a heritage and a reward. Children, like sleep, are gifts from our senior partner. Though somehow those two gifts, sleep and children, rarely arrive at the same time. For most people, children are conceived without much effort on our part. If it's work, it's the enjoyable kind of work. Raising children, on the other hand, is work. And again, we're invited to see God as the senior partner in that project, which is daunting, like what you were saying about the ramifications of the decisions we're making. Even as we wait on God, that's a lot. There are some of us, however, for whom even the road to bearing children requires a lot of work. LGBTQ folks and others who struggle with fertility can invest a lot of time and money into artificial insemination, fertility doctors, adoption applications, and still not see any of this heritage or reward from God. So sometimes reading verses like this just kind of twists the knife a little bit, making us feel less than. And I know some people have even been shamed by verses like this. And I don't want to downplay that pain because some of my closest friends are dealing with it intensely right now. And I'm angry with God for withholding the desires of their hearts, because if anyone deserves the gift of children, it's them. And if we learn anything from the Psalms, I think it's that we don't need to hold back our anger or our honesty from God. God can take it. And in the midst of that deep frustration, I also read these verses and I feel grateful for the way that God expanded the idea of family. Because in Solomon's time, it was all about bloodlines and sons and descendants to take care of you. But New Testament writers blew that idea open and introduced this concept of being adopted and grafted into God's family, being cared for and loved by people who weren't your blood relatives, and being able to care for and connect with them, this big family of God. I think some of the most important gifts that I've received this year are my relationships with the children at Open Way. Especially Susie, River, and Orion, because they were here from the beginning, but I'm getting to know Declan and Spencer and some other ones. They keep me honest and humble and hopeful and laughing when they say things like Jesus bread. They are like a heritage that we all get to share. They're part of our collective quiver, so maybe we can hit 20 or 30 if we think big together. And they're shaping what Open Way is becoming. And we get to help shape them too. We get to help share that burden of junior partnership with their parents as they shoot their kids like arrows into the future. They're part of how our work gets established and endures. So work, rest, and children. Which of these areas is kind of paying for you as something to pay attention to? When I think about this stuff, I realize that almost all of my jobs that I've ever had have been as sort of a junior partner. At camps, at churches, at Jacob's Well where I used to work, now with Generous Space. I've always enjoyed finding something that's already happening that I admire, and then coming alongside and contributing my gifts, making it even better, without the risk or responsibility of ultimate decision making. And that was all going really well for me, until I had this idea of a church startup. And suddenly there wasn't someone else to look to, someone else running the show. For the first time I felt like the senior partner, which freaked me out, so I quickly found another senior partner in Mark, and I'm forever grateful that he has been willing to partner with me. But last year, as we were starting to gather people, I was still super overwhelmed by this. And I guess I was, as Solomon said, I was eating the bread of anxious toil. I didn't think I had what it took to do a church startup. So I told my spiritual director how I felt, and in her usual esoteric way, she asked me to describe my feelings as an image. So I tried to let my imagination run a little bit, and I said, I think I see like a ball of yarn all tangled up. And she said, oh, what does it look like? How big is it? And I said, it's red, and it's actually huge. It's like the yarn is this big around, and I can't even move it, let alone try to untangle it. And as usual, my spiritual director asked, where is Jesus in that picture? And after some listening, I said, I think he's sitting on top of the bundle of yarn, and he's kind of laughing at me, but not in like a harsh way, in sort of a gentle, knowing way. And he's whispering playfully, let's do this together. Let's do this. And that was the moment I realized that I was not a senior partner after all. Mark and I are just both still junior partners of Open Way.
Amen.
We didn't need to carry it all. It didn't belong to us. You know, I could stop pretending that I was in control, that I was the boss, and instead focus on just showing up and contributing my gifts and receiving God's gifts. We were doing this together. I read this lesson almost every day. I forgot it even as I was writing this sermon, which is super ironic. But then I went for my usual morning walk, which I've talked about here before, my daily pilgrimage that I've been taking, and I remembered, as I thought about this psalm, that it doesn't depend on how well I can preach this, or write this, or whatever. I recited this psalm, and I thought about how the Jews were reciting it as they walked on their pilgrimage. They too were pressing pause on their work to do this pilgrimage to Jerusalem, which wasn't earning them any money, being with their families, and maybe they needed this psalm to remind themselves that that was worth it, as junior partners, that they could do that. I want my work to be sustainable. I want it to last. And I mentioned that this psalm was my dad's favorite. When I told him I was preaching on it, he sent me that old sermon of his, and I read it and realized, as he was describing, that he had gone through severe burnout from ministry in the early 90s when I was a kid. And then he'd stumbled across this psalm, Psalm 127, and he studied it, and it reoriented his understanding of work and challenged him to spend more time with his kids. So unbeknownst to me, this psalm had a positive impact on my childhood. And in this roundabout way, my dad's ideas about this psalm from 30 years ago is now having an impact on me as I figure out how to be a pastor today. So talk about work that endures, right? So this is the memo to all junior partners. Listen up. The ones who are addicted to work, the ones who are retired and can't find work, or the ones who can't control the overtime they're being assigned, and that's why they're not here today. Tim. The ones who feel hopeless with the current housing or rental of their income, the ones who suffer from anxiety or lack of sleep, whose bodies won't let them rest, the ones whose kids won't let them rest, the ones who would love to have some kids that let them rest, and the ones who are still trying to figure out why kids would be a gift at all. Whatever your ball of tangled big red yarn is today, here is the good news. God calls you by name. You are beloved, you are Jedediah. God says you are valuable not for what you do, but for who you are. And yes, God delights in partnering with you. God delights in establishing the work of your hands. And God is no slave driver. God is a gift giver. God gives gifts, including but not limited to children and sleep. So let's open our hands to receive And let's throw up our hands and give up very often, even daily, because we're not in control, and we never were. We're the junior partners, and that is very good news. Amen.